Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth ever episode of On The Gridiron. Of course, I am your host, Matthew Heiserman, and we have a great episode ahead of us. Today, the NFL season started on Thursday. Today, it is Monday, and yesterday was the first ever Sunday of this NFL season, where the Commanders faced off against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 4:25 in Tampa Bay. Not quite the result that me and every other Commander fan wanted, as the Commanders did lose by a score of 37-20. Some ups, some downs, but overall a lot to break down. So we're just kind of gonna run through everything that happened that game, break it down. I'm gonna give you my thoughts, and it will be a great episode. So let's get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the kicker position, which for a lot of teams is not a problem. They just have their kicker, they have that guy, and they keep that guy. But for the Commanders, unfortunately, finding a good kicker is not that easy for us. We claimed Riley Patterson off of the waivers over the offseason. I believe that was July 31st. And then he played in preseason. He played the first two games. It was against the Dolphins, and I'm forgetting who we played in that first game, but it was the first two games. He didn't play against the Patriots in the third game because he was already released by that point. But the point I'm trying to get across is in those first two games, he only went 2 for 5 out of his field goals, 40% rate. And obviously, that's not great. So, as I mentioned, he was released a month after just claiming him off waivers on August 22nd. And then on that same day, the Commanders traded for former Browns kicker Cade York to replace Patterson. Now, Cade York struggled definitely in week one, and we're going to get into that now. Of course, as I mentioned, against the Buccaneers, went 0 for 2 from field goals, which obviously is not a great sign. And his first one was a miss from 47 yards, which isn't the easiest kick, but you should still make it if you're a good enough kicker. And then the second one, I believe, was from 56 yards. And that one I understand a little more that he missed. Of course, 56 yards is a very difficult field goal, but if you're going to miss both of them, that's not a great look, especially on your first game as a kicker for a new team. So he did end up getting cut or released earlier today, right before I actually started filming this episode. Now, there's an important thing to break down. When we traded for Cade York, it was a trade with the Cleveland Browns, and we gave them a conditional 7th round pick, and we got Cade York in return. If you don't understand what that means, it's basically saying that we gave them a 7th round pick, but if Cade York does not play 2 games for us, then we get that pick back. So he did, as I mentioned, he got released right before I started filming this, which means that the Commanders do end up getting that 7th round pick back, which is, I don't love his performance, and I'm glad that we released him. I'll definitely take the pick back. I'm glad we have the pick back. Now, I want to kind of just break down the thing with kickers as a whole, and it's that, there's not really any room for error because you look at a quarterback, oh, they throw a interception, they got to be better next time. You're not cutting a quarterback for throwing an interception. Same thing with a running back. If they fumble the ball, it's not a big deal. Maybe you sit them for a drive, maybe 2 drives. You put them back in the game, it's all fine. A wide receiver, you drop a ball, that's also fine. If you drop like 10 throughout the season, 15, that's when it gets to be a problem. But just one-time mistakes, don't necessarily cost you your job. You know, a cornerback, maybe you allow a wide receiver to get a touchdown on you. Okay, yeah, again, you got to be better next drive, but it's all right. Kicker's the one position where if you mess up one time, you are immediately put on the chopping block because kicker, of course, the one thing you have to do is kick and you have to do it well. You got to make your field goals, you got to make your extra points. And if you're not able to do that, then you're immediately a potential person to get cut because there's probably someone that's better than you out there. And I mean, that's the situation for all kickers. So you miss two field goals in a game and you're immediately in the conversations to be getting cut. That's what happened with Cade York. Now, the Commanders are expected to sign Austin Seibert. Seibert played with the Browns, Bengals, Lions, Jets. Hasn't played that much, maybe 4 years, I think. So we'll see what happens there. I've heard some mixed reports on this. I've heard that we already signed him, but then I also haven't seen anything official from the Commanders. I haven't seen anything from Schefter or Rappaport. So I'll keep my eyes out. By the time I'm done filming this, there's a good chance that he has been officially signed by us. But we'll see what happens. Their overall kicker, it's not the biggest position that you think about, but when your team's really struggling at that position, you really do notice it, and it does make a big effect on your team. But we are going to move on. Before we get over to the defense, I want to break down something that is at least good and something that we can be happy about, and that is Jaden Daniels' week one performance. He did really good. I saw something, it was his stats put against Caleb Williams and Bo Nix stats, the two other rookie starting quarterbacks, and Jaden was far and away the best player, so I'm glad to see that. I believe it was he got 184 passing yards. A lot of those came in the fourth quarter, maybe late third quarter, but I know for most of the game he was around 50 passing yards, not really moving the ball that much in the air. But the main thing that really, separated his game from the rest was his rushing. This game, he got 16 carries, which, by the way, is an absurd amount for a quarterback. He got 88 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Both the rushing touchdowns were maybe 3 yards. Nothing too crazy, but he got his touchdowns, he got his yards, he got his carries, and he looked really comfortable, honestly, when he was out there running the ball. There were a lot of situations you thought he was going to take that sack, and then he just got out of the pocket, maybe made a one juke on the defender, and broke loose for a good amount of yards. Now, of course, there were these reports at practice, training camp, all that he wasn't practicing sliding. Now, this is kind of funny. It was hard to tell whether he was practicing sliding because he never actually did a fluent slide. He more of did a baby somersault, if I had to describe it. So not necessarily great at sliding. Definitely something that he has to work on, because if you're in the NFL and you're going to rush that much, you have to eventually learn how to slide, even if you don't want to. Now, the thing I'm a little concerned about is, will he be able to sustain running 16 times a game for 17 games in the season without getting an injury? And my immediate thought goes to no, he probably won't, because that's a very difficult thing to do. And even this game, his helmet came off 2 times from different hits. I don't know if that's a problem with his helmet. Maybe it had to be tighter. But he took one big hit from a Winfield, another on one of the plays where he almost got a rushing touchdown. But overall, you could already see the plays where he could have potentially gotten hurt. Thank goodness he didn't. But if he keeps rushing this much, I, of course, don't want him to get hurt, obviously, but there could be a situation where he does get hurt, and that would not be good at all. Now, the second best rusher on the team, I believe, was Brian Robinson Jr. He got a rushing touchdown as well, and I think he got about 40 rushing yards. So that just kind of tells you how much they were utilizing Jaden Daniels. No one else was necessarily as relevant in the rushing game. Not only rushing game, but also the passing game, where the most amount of receiving yards anyone got was 52, and that was Austin Eckler, 4 receptions, 52 yards. Brian Robinson Jr. was second with receiving yards, and he had 3 receptions for 49 yards. And I'm not going to make a big deal about this, but Daniels didn't necessarily look the most comfortable out there passing. For instance, most of his passes were short passes. He did a few long passes, one to Terry McLaurin, and he did overshoot it. But for the most part, it was, short checkdowns, get it to your running back, let him get some yards after the reception, a lot of different stuff like that. Didn't necessarily take any pass any deep balls. Now, there was a play in preseason. Oh, now I'm remembering who we played in the first preseason game. It was the New York Jets. And I wanted to bring that up because there was a play in preseason. The first completion for Daniels actually was a good 40-yard pass downfield to Diame Brown. Brown made a great catch. And that just showed you the arm strength that Daniels had, and he looked comfortable using it. This game was kind of the opposite. Does he still have their arm strength? Obviously, but he didn't look as comfortable using it against a real NFL defense, against actual starters instead of third string guys. So, I mean, that's obviously something to watch out for. It just looked like he could pass if he had to, but if he had the opportunity to run the ball, best believe he was going to take that opportunity and he was going to run the ball. Just, didn't necessarily feel comfortable in the pocket as much, tried to get out of the pocket, as much as he could, as quick as he could. Now, again, great rushing performance from him, and he made some great rushing plays, extremely fast, and was able to outrun his defenders a lot of the time. But again, that's just not, I don't think that'll last the entire season. He won't be able to do that and get away with that the entire season. Defenses are going to catch on. At some point, he's going to have to pass to his wide receivers. And he did again in that fourth quarter when they were down by a lot. But even then, he didn't risk anything. He didn't throw anything long. It was, again, just short passes that had some good yards after catch. So we'll monitor that. We'll see how he can grow as a passing quarterback. But overall, a lot of potential, and I'm really excited to see what he is able to do in the NFL. Moving over to the receivers, not really much action at all from the receivers. Zach Ertz was the third highest player in receiving yards, and he's obviously a tight end. Luke McCaffrey was up there, but the real concern for me is McLaurin, who got 2 receptions for 17 yards. I mean, it just felt like McLaurin was kind of irrelevant out there. Like they didn't need him in that first reception that he got. It was a play, Jaden Daniels just threw it, right to the side of him was McLaurin, and that felt forced. That didn't really feel like a great play call necessarily. It felt like the Commanders wanted to get Terry McLaurin the ball, so that's why they did it. And I just hope that he's able to play well with Jaden. If you ask me, I thought that McLaurin was going to be a beast this year, but now I'm starting to second guess that because I feel like potentially Jaden's going to be running so much that the wide receivers aren't necessarily utilized as much as they should be. So we'll see what happens there, but overall, definitely a little concerning. This is a situation, I don't know what Diame Brown would have done, but maybe it would have been nice to have him because it feels like, you have McLaurin, you have Brown, you have McCaffrey, Olamide Zaccheaus, but besides McLaurin, no one, I'm not saying that our wide receiver core doesn't have any potential. Of course they do. But I just didn't think that they were doing much. And again, this might be because Daniels wasn't comfortable passing or whatever it was. But Not a great showing from any of the wide receivers. Hopefully, they get that fixed. Speaking of not a great showing from the defense as a complete whole. Terrible, 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 terrible defensive performance this game. I mean, allowing 37 points speaks for itself, but what specifically was bad about the defense? Well, we need to break down. First of all, Benjamin St. Juice, I want to talk about him a little bit. He had to guard Mike Evans pretty much the entire game. And from first glance, it looked like he got absolutely destroyed by Mike Evans. And he sort of did. Mike Evans had, 60 something, maybe 70 something yards, obviously 2 receiving touchdowns, and was a big threat. Now, there was a mix in what Mike Evans was able to do. Part of it was him actually running good routes and completely beating St. Juice. The other part was him using his size against St. Juice because he's, what is it, 6'5", I think, 200 something pounds. Really big receiver, obviously one of the biggest in the entire NFL. And during that first touchdown that he got, it was, running across right next to the sidelines, and him and St. Juice were being physical. Juice, was pushing him a little bit. Not enough to really call a flag. I'd say it was actually more good coverage on St. Juice end. But it doesn't really matter when you're going up against a 6'5" wide receiver. A little pushing doesn't really do anything to him. He was still able to make that catch pretty easily. But overall, that was an example of Juice made good coverage, but it didn't matter because Mike Evans is just that good of a receiver. Now, there were other plays where it was just absolutely terrible and there was no coverage whatsoever. And I want to break down those plays. Now, I'm not going to just sit here and explain those plays. When you're done listening to this episode, I want you to look up the highlights for the game, and I want you to look at 2 plays specifically. It was Jalen McMillan's first play where he dropped the pass, and it would have been a touchdown if he caught it, but the Commanders got bailed out. He dropped the pass. Mike Sanistril got absolutely, completely beat by McMillan on that play. Really, really, really bad coverage. The safety was nowhere to be found. And I mean, you can't let that happen. I don't know how he got so wide open. Now you think, okay, it happens one time. We got bailed out. We won't let it happen again. No, because then McMillan got a very long touchdown later in the game, and he was just as, if not more, wide open than he was on that first play. Again, no one there covering him. He beat the cornerback. The safety wasn't there to help, and overall, just a really bad play from our defense. So yeah, look at those 2 plays that McMillan had, and it's just really bad. Our secondary is without a doubt the biggest place that we need help because I mean, we just can't be allowing stuff like that. This is a good receiving core, Evans and Godwin. Of course, they're aging, they have their flaws. Overall, it's a good receiving core. Put us against Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Tyreek is going for 200 yards. I mean, it's just really bad. We don't have it. Just players are getting lost out there. Yeah, Sanistril got a lot of tackles. His stats look all right. Same with Quan Martin, guys like them. But if you look at the game, there were so many plays where they're just making mistakes that a young player would make, and they're unacceptable. And that's really the main problems that we had. But just a really bad secondary performance. Again, needs a lot of help right there. And hopefully they can work on things and get it slightly fixed before they have to go up against even better wide receivers and not an aging Mike Evans who is still able to look like he was in his prime. Now, real quick before we wrap things up, the last thing we're going to talk about is our defensive ends, defensive lines, edge rushers, all those kind of guys. They were really bad as well. And we got 1 sack. It was from a Cleveland Farrell, the new accusation over the off season, but just overall really bad on the defensive end. It felt like there were a lot of plays where we surrounded Baker Mayfield and he was just able to get right out of the pocket. That's not a guy, if you did that with Jaden Daniels and Daniels got out of the pocket, I wouldn't be surprised. Daniels is fast. Same with Lamar. Same with Josh Allen, Kyler Murray. But Baker is never using his legs that much. But it just felt like we could have completely surrounded him, have three guys right next to Baker, but we couldn't execute the play and we let him escape. There were many, many times when that happened, and just overall really bad on the Commanders. And so, yeah, a lot of problems with the kickers, a lot of problems with the secondary, the defensive line. Those are the main issues. It's still too early to tell with the wide receiver game. They might be bad. We might not have enough weapons for Daniels, or Daniels might have just not necessarily utilized them this game as much as he should. Daniels, of course, looked really good, and it's unfortunate to say that doesn't really look like we're going to be contending this year. I didn't think we were going to be contending, but obviously not. But I would have preferred to get 7 wins, 8 wins, maybe 9 wins. We have a nice season, get 9 wins. I don't think that's going to happen, to be honest. I think that right now, a more reasonable standard is 5 wins because there's just so many flaws. The thing I really care about is watching our young guys progress this season because that's all that matters to me right now. I know that we're not going to be winning, but if I see Jaden out there doing well, I'm going to be happy. If I see Jaden continuing to build a connection with McLaurin, I'm going to be happy. Sanistro, he's getting better out there. Maybe Senate gets in on the action at tight end. But I just want to see our young guys start to do better. I want to see Dan Quinn be all right as the head coach. I want to see a good second year of the new ownership, just building blocks to eventually get to potentially contending in a few years. For now, overall, an underwhelming first week. I'll try and do a recap every week if I can. Just, give my main takeaways based on how everything is going. So we'll see how that does. But again, make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're on Spotify, make sure to follow me for more great content like this. But with that being said, that wraps up the 4th ever episode of On the Gridiron. As always, I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.